Now, to bring this to life a little bit, can you tell us any more individual stories of people who have wanted to take some water and have been spied upon by their own government?
Yes, look, I've heard of a few. There was another guy at 11 o'clock at night. I don't know the full story at the moment, and we're looking into that. But in regards to, there was a person from the Department of Water up in a shed looking what he was doing, and this particular night, and I'm going by what he's told me, the pump on the motor wasn't working, and he was out on his easement. He started up the motor, but the actual pump wasn't working, so there was no water going through the pump.
Yep.
And he walked away, and next minute this vehicle come down and he saw the lights.
Yeah.
And he put his hands up, and they actually hit him. He grabbed hold of the bull bar and was dragged about 20 metres and left there, and off they took.
Well, I'm not going to tell you what criminal offence I think they committed in doing that, because it would be highly libellous until we've investigated the facts.
Oh, look, it needs to be looked into, but let's just say that he was doing the wrong thing.
Well, wait a minute. I would like to just check whether he was allowed to take water from the dam for himself and his stock.
That's a very good point, and that needs to be looked at.
Now, I in fact have, in this particular case,
yes,
I had the pleasure of meeting this gentleman,
yes,
yesterday.
Good.
And I asked him to show me whether he had any right to take any water from where he was. After all, it struck me as peculiar that they were saying he didn't have the right to take water from there because he had an easement, what in Scotland we call a servitude right, to go over a neighbour's patch of land to get to the creek to get the water. Now, if he wasn't allowed to get the water, how come he had an easement to get the water?
Very good point.
And so I asked him that. And he said, well, of course I was allowed to get the water. He said, for my own domestic purposes and for my stock, I was allowed to take whatever water I needed from that creek and cross the easement patch of land next to the creek that belonged to my neighbour so that I could get it and then pipe and pump the water up over his land and onto mine. So I said, were you using that water on the day they said you were using it improperly for any purpose other than yourself and your stock? And he said to me, no. Now, of course, I don't know. I haven't yet spoken to them. I am going to, I can assure you, I'm going to follow this up.
Right.
But his story is that he was taking the water for his own purposes. However, what happened to him?
Well, as I said, he was dragged about 20 metres, and he was left there. Off they took. And the thing is, I sort of think, well, let's say that if he was doing the wrong thing, does anybody deserve to be hit by a car and left?
Well, I think we have to be a little careful before we say for definite that that's what happened.
That's fine.
What I think we can say for definite is that if he's right, that he had the right to extract that water from his creek, and if they left him for dead rather than interview him, then they had no means of knowing whether such water as they had seen him extract that day from the creek was being used for his own purposes or for some other purpose which was improper. And so the question then is, what did the courts do? Did they convict the people who hit him? Did they convict him of something? What happened?
No, the people that supposedly hit him, no conviction. I think he ended up with about a $18,000 fine.
An $18,000 fine for extracting water from a creek over a piece of land on which he had an easement precisely to do that.
That's correct.
And I checked very carefully. I have seen a letter from a member of the South Australian Parliament in relation to this incident, which is beginning to make headlines, as you know, even though it happened some years ago. All around here the farmers are talking about it. They're extremely angry about it, which suggests that he may not be the one who isn't telling the truth here. We don't know yet till I've talked to the other side. I can't form a view.
Exactly.
But he was fined $18,000 for taking water which his story is he was entitled to take. And as I say, I have seen the letter from a Member of Parliament confirming that he was indeed entitled to take water from that creek, provided he used it for himself and his stock. So when the Natural Resources Management Board Water Division took samples of the water from, I think he had 1 or 2 pumps there to help him pump the water, all they would have found is that obviously if these were water pumps standing next to the creek, the water in the pumps would have been the water from the creek. No surprises there. But that, it seems to me, does not tell us that the water from the creek was then used for an illegal purpose. No amount of sampling could have told us that. Exactly. So my question then is this. It seems to me that they had not done their homework before they began hiding behind a shed or up the trees or wherever they were and spying on one of their fellow citizens. They hadn't checked whether he had the right to take any water. Now, as I understand it, he had to go to hospital for a week as a result of this incident, suffering from post-traumatic stress and injury, very severe bruising to his leg, which I believe, I haven't yet seen the doctor's report, but I believe that is in the doctor's report. And I also understand that he is still in pain to this day, 6 years after this incident. Is that right?
No, that's correct. That's correct. And, you know, he's got a lot of documents which I'm sure that you'll see. And as I said, Lord Monckton, this is a disgrace that we're even putting up with this.
So they went to the court, not having checked their homework. He was too ill to go, as I understand it, and the court made an order against him for this huge fine without having heard his side of the story, without even being made aware by these wretches that he had the right to extract water from that creek.
Yes.
This is a very, very serious matter. Because he is definitely still affected by that. I think you and I have seen him. We know the effect that this has when officials, you see, to them this is normal, this kind of behaviour. You know, it would be normal in communist Russia. I find it surprising that they think it normal in what is supposed to be the free country of Australia. But this is what he says they did, and certainly I have seen the order of the court, an order which in my view should not have been made, given that it was quite clear on the paperwork which I know was before the court from the police who were called to this incident, that he had indeed suffered, and suffered considerably, and mentally as well as physically, as a result of this incident. There's no way the court should have made that kind of an order against somebody who was manifestly a very sick man. However, I do have one piece of good news for you on this.
Gee, that'll be nice. We don't often hear that.
It proved to be completely impossible for the court to make him pay the fine. He simply didn't have the means. After this incident had effectively destroyed his ability to earn a living, he simply didn't have the means to pay the fine. And they then said, right, well, we'll make you do 320 hours of community service instead. And the community service people, seeing the state he was in, realised that something terrible had gone wrong, and they said, look, we're not going to ask you to do any community
It's nice
service.
to see common sense.
And so the judges, it seems to me, who are willing to sit there and savagely enforce these cruel and improper laws, allowing for egregiously outrageous fines to be imposed on people who in this case were extracting water that they were entitled to extract. This is an outrage, and it seems to me that 1 or 2 judges are going to have to be rather sharply talked to by you and your group. And what I would suggest is that you get in touch with the Chief Justice of this region, you ask to have a meeting with him, and you tell him exactly what you think of him and his fellow judges handing down these judgments without realising just how much harm they are doing. I have spoken to several people around here by now, thanks to your kind introductions and to my own going into the pub and just talking. And one thing that is absolutely clear is that there is real fear now of the Natural Resources Management Board. The people are running scared of it. The farmers are scared of it. Scared not because they're all busy doing illegal things. As you say, they're not growing marijuana around the back. They're not doing anything illegal. But they're scared that whatever they do, they can be held liable. I've seen notices on the roadsides here saying nobody is allowed to touch or disturb or move or pick the vegetation or even disturb the soil.
Correct.
Now, can you tell me something about a farmer who had some rocks on his land?
Well, this was another elderly gentleman and his wife, and actually he was going to clear a bit of silt out of this little creek, and the rigmarole that he had to go through with engineers' reports and all the rest of it. And basically what they want to do is they want to try and make that much regulation, it's virtually impossible for us to do anything on our properties.
Because it's simply too expensive to comply and to wait forever while they get round to giving you permission.
Exactly.
Yes.
But this particular NRM officer said, well, by the way, we can fine you for shifting a rock. I mean, how?
Now that, it seems to me, was a threat. There's no other way you can look at that. We can fine you for shifting a rock.
Yeah, that's correct. I can introduce you to these people.
Well, I've met several of them already, and each of the ones where you have told me an outline of their story, when they have told me the story, you have been in all respects correct. So I think you're pretty good at this, and so you should be as the Executive Director of the Farmers and Landowners Action Group Australia. So that is, seems to me, is bullying. And indeed, in that case where somebody did clear his silt without going through the pantomime of engineers' reports at vast expense, because an engineer's report you're looking at several $1,000s before you start, he was fined, or threatened with a fine, of $35,000, even though in that particular instance he was not the one that had done anything wrong, it was his predecessors. And they just wrote to him threatening him with a fine anyway. They didn't bother yet again to check the facts before they made these threats. Now these threats are very frightening. You know, as you will know, farming is not an enormously profitable enterprise. No. And in a climate like this, it's always going to be marginal at best, and probably loss-making at worst. The last thing you can afford is a $6,000 engineer's report, and still less a $35,000 fine, and still less a $2.2 million fine, as these wretches are now trying to get enacted. So I'm very disturbed to see all this, and it really is very worrying. Now, one of the things that I imagine they do is, we certainly do it in the UK, is that larger reservoirs for water have to be regulated in various ways, partly for understandable safety reasons. I mean, we mustn't be too unreasonable and say no regulation should ever be permitted.
Not saying that.
But of course the regulations that this particular body makes under this extraordinary 280-odd page Act of Parliament of 2004, these are very pernickety, and a lot of them seem to me to be entirely unnecessary and pernicious. But how do they measure whether a reservoir that has to be heavily and savagely and expensively regulated is big enough to qualify?
Well, they've got satellite imagery and an aerial photo of the surface.
In other words, what they're doing, they're using Google Earth, basically.
Yeah, basically. And they've got surface water, right?
Yes.
And then they come onto your property and say, well, look, here we go, we've got an aerial photo of the surface water of your property.
Yes.
And then they come out with a measuring stick and go to the deepest end of your dam.
Yes.
And then they do their calculation. Now, a woman rang me and said that we've got a letter through to say that our dam, guesstimate mind you, is 10.16 meg. And she said there is no way that it is that big.
Now, they had calculated this by going onto Google Earth or getting some pimply teenager to do it. He had simply worked out the surface area of the dam. They had guessed how deep it was, and then had said, we'll just do a multiplication sum, and that's how much water. And they said 10.16 million litres.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, and thanks to the Honourable Anne Bresington MLC and Flag Australia, we funded to get a proper water surveyor in to do an accurate measurement of the dam, and lo and behold, it come in at just over 6 meg. That is 4 meg difference. I'm sorry, I'm in the old school. That's 1 million gallons.
That's right. So let's get this right. We've got a dam whose maximum capacity was 6.1 million litres. Right. That was the actual capacity as measured by a surveyor on the ground.
Correct.
I've seen the survey report on this dam. It was an extremely detailed job. They got out in a boat, they measured the depth, they got a complete profile.
Exactly.
They used a special computer program to take slices, do the differential calculus. Right. I mean, this was a proper job of surveying, no doubt about it. So I'd be surprised very much if they were out by more than, you know, 100,000 litres here or there. It was a very accurate piece of surveying. They said 6.1 million litres, and the government, using its teenager on Google Earth, said it was 10.2.
10.16.
Well, now that is an enormous excess. I mean, we're looking at way over 50% bigger than what was really there. Now that must concern landowners with dams that are kind of on the borderline, which I think is 5 million litres, as to whether they too are having these measurements got wrong. So what happened when this farmer challenged the calculations done by the Natural Resources Management Board?
We haven't heard back as yet. We're waiting for a response on that. But one thing I'd like people looking at this DVD is, can you imagine if you got your bank statement and you were a few $1,000s short on your bank statement, and you went into your bank manager and said, excuse me, there's a mistake here, there's a few $1,000s missing. And the bank manager said, look, don't worry, we're only guessing. They're guessing with our livelihoods. We will not put up with this, believe me, because we will be sent to the wall, and when your back's against the wall, you've got nowhere to turn, you come out to fight. Now, I don't mean by guns or silly things like that, but we cannot put up with this lunacy any longer, and we won't, because there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that I meet now that have had an absolute enough of this bureaucracy, this madness.